And they use lovely cons. Now, one of the eugenicists is a man who heads up the Human Genome Project. He's the boss, and he's come out with a new test, supposedly. And here's how it's worded. This is a handout to all newspapers, a complete handout from the guys who are pushing this. It says, new genetic test for severe childhood diseases. So it sounds legit. It's a test for severe. It doesn't say that might find or possibly might or anything like that. No. Then it says couples are to be offered a simple test to stop them passing on any of more than 500 genetic diseases to their children, right? So that sounds very concrete in its wording. And it says the blood test that costs £400 per person could be available in months and eliminate hereditary illnesses such as cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia. So it says it could be available. That could only applies to the availability of it. But it says, and eliminate hereditary illnesses. So it's going to eliminate, they claim, right? It says, but it's also controversial because critics claim it could lead to a new form of eugenics. It's the same form of eugenics with the usual priesthood, white coats behind it. It says parents with a risk could ask for embryos to be screened out through IVF treatment or abortion if they were at risk of passing on a serious disease. Now, I've read on the air here articles from in the past where people were advised to have abortions because of possibilities of things. Then they found that their children were perfectly healthy when they went ahead and didn't abort. Makes you wonder how many other ones would be healthy too. Because these screening tests are pretty well rubbishy. They cannot tell if you're going to have that disease or not. They cannot tell that. But you wouldn't think so if you read this. It's really an handout, an advertisement. It's handed out to all the newspapers. They put it right in their papers, quite happy to have some filler space. And of course there's no inquiry into it. Or the guy who heads it up in his past and his history too. You can look up at Wikipedia for yourself, the Human Genome Project, and this article, and you'll find out who that is. Anyway, so a preconception genetic test could be used routinely by doctors to screen for severe recessively inherited childhood diseases in couples before they have children, reports a new study. Those with a family history of conditions such as cystic fibrosis and Fragile X syndrome, that's when you end up in these strange movies called the X movies, are already entitled to screening on the National Health Service, it says. But they're not, they're definitely not very reliable at all. Already tests are available for 100 or so diseases in the private sector, but now with more powerful gene screening equipment, scientists have extended the range. So it's developed by the National Center for Genome Resources in New Mexico, and yada, 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 etc. It sounds all so wonderful for safety. Safety, who wants somebody who doesn't measure up to what's supposed to be the norm. And why not just abort it or allow them, if you've got extra cash, to take those genes out and replace them with proper genes, the proper type, you see. And that's really what eugenics is all about. It's the same thing with the poor, etc. It's not that they want to bring down the whole human race. They want to bring down the wrong kind of people. That's what they've said in the past. That's what Charles Galton Darwin said himself in the 1950s. The wrong kind. The wrong kind will outbreed the better kind, you see. The ones who are more psychopathic and know how to fight to get up there into positions of power and wealth by ripping everybody else off. Because that's all Darwinism is. Survival of the fittest is the most cunning and utterly ruthless with less conscience. If you've got a conscience, you can't get up there. Can't do it. So I'll put this article up tonight. As I say, all these articles up at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and you can look it up for yourself. Now, here's another article in today as well, journalnow.com. It says victims of forced sterilization are hurting and dying off. This is in the United States, the forced sterilization program of eugenics of the past. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix, and talking about eugenics just to kick the show off really because it's in the news, and how they're going ahead with it under, again, the better science. They're better now at eugenics than they used to be, and that they hate the term eugenics. They want to help civilization and help society by basically having the right to tamper with your genes and your sperm and the ovum and all the rest of it and decide who should live and die, basically. That's always been their program. And yet, as I say, here's an article here. It says victims of forced sterilization are hurting and dying off because they had this forced sterilization, not just in the US, I had it in Canada too, especially for American Indians. But it says victims of sterilization are hurting and dying off. And at the state legislature, as it convenes on Wednesday, Governor Bev Perdue should present it with a clear plan for helping the surviving victims of North Carolina's forced sterilization program. Some might argue that with the legislature facing the challenge of closing a $3.7 billion budget shortfall, this is not the time to help those victims. I think economics again, isn't it? But with the victims continuing to suffer with physical and emotional ills from their operations, and with some of them having died waiting for help, the state has a moral obligation to finally right the wrong visited upon them. Well, they see there's no moral right when it comes to economics. It's a very bland, straight, up and down affair. Anyway, this article here goes on about some of the history of the eugenics movement and the compulsory sterilization, because they had programs for the perfect American family funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, of course, from the very beginning. And they helped to get that through most of the U.S. states. They ran from the 20s, as I say, right through into the 70s. And they want to go back to it again. So I'll put that up as well. Now here's another article that ties right in with it too. This is a repetition of studies that do all the time to make sure that people are kept pretty dumb at the bottom, because they're kept dumb even by the junk food that they eat. It says junk food diet may lower the children's IQ, studies suggest. Well, they've done this for as long as I've been alive. They know darn well what it does to the public. They know darn well what kind of diet a child needs when it's growing, and what happens to its brain if it doesn't get the proper diet. So another study just to make sure they're on target with keeping enough of the population at the bottom, pretty low on the totem pole of the IQ they claim.
Yes. I had some other questions about free health care for Native Canadians. I myself fall under that category, and I heard also, I've been listening to your stuff about inoculations and stuff, and I myself have had ear troubles as a child. I still do, I just and I heard you mention intuition as well with other people, and I sort of felt this sort of intuition, this sort of distrust of a lot of stuff growing up as a Native Canadian, and just seeing, just certain things on a smaller scale in sort of like a schoolyard setting or, certain settings, and just sort of feeling this sort of intuition or distrust of certain things, feeling there's something bigger going on here.
Oh, there's something bigger going on. We're getting trained exactly to know exactly what we're supposed to know. And whether it's true or false doesn't matter. We're supposed to know this. But your inoculations, you understand too, that especially Indians on reservations in Canada, because they get grants and so on, and they're kept in these reservations, by law they have to accept the medical authorities. They have to accept them. And so it's really the field testing there on all these different inoculations. Now, what's interesting to me is that childhood diseases, the runny noses, the otitis media, all the ear problems and so on, they tell you is natural in medical school. But before they came out with all these the infant inoculations, it didn't happen. They didn't have these. In other words, these things they were getting as childhood problems were actually caused by the vaccines. And I personally know people whose daughters, that their daughters have had children, and they convinced them, different ones convinced them for the next child not to have inoculations. The ones who had no inoculations had no childhood diseases, no sore ears, no runny noses, no coughs. So obviously it's caused by the very stuff that they're injecting into you. But the Indians, unfortunately, are supposed to mandatorily take all these inoculations because they take grants. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I've been wondering about that. What, why do the Native people get, seem to be, get all this free health care and free, tax breaks and all this stuff like that. And there's like treaties have been broken and all this stuff, but it seems like they're still sort of getting a little bit of an edge on other people. And I just wondered, like, why is that? Why these people? You know what I mean? It must be something going on
if you go into, this is a fascinating thing. If you go into the history of eugenics and economics, and go into the writings of John Stuart Mill, he has it listed as the same as H.G. Wells had it listed. He worked for the later organization of the same group. They had all the different peoples listed as the superior all the way down to inferior. And they all had it classified, even in the 1700s, that the American Indian, the Irish, and eventually H.G. Wells added it later on to the Scots as well, would be people who would have to be eliminated because they couldn't adapt into the new system. That's no kidding, that's what they said. So hold on, we're back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back and cutting through the matrix. I don't know if Justin's still there. Is he still there, Justin?
Yes, I am still here, Alan.
I was going to say that, you understand that the whole policy, the whole belief system or religion of eugenics and Darwinism states that if people cannot adapt, not only do they die, they must die. Or they'll bring down those who are evolving higher and higher. They'll bring them down. That's what they truly believe, and that's really official policy through academia. They still push and promote the same thing. That's through government as well. And I've talked to, I knew someone who was up in the government, the Federal Department for Indian Affairs in Canada. And she told me that she criticized that the Indians wouldn't work and so on, and et cetera, et cetera. In other words, see, the only way you can adapt into this system, it is a system, is by joining them and mimicking them, as Charles Darwin called it too. Those who can't mimic the white guy has to perish, basically. And that means also going into the same kind of business, money lending or money borrowing, etc., and producing. That's what they call the normal system. And so they will not tolerate any other kind of system going alongside themselves. So I think it's personally it's policy of simple extermination over time. That's all it is to me. Yeah.